Good day, everyone. Today we will be discussing one of the readings in Philippine history, The Customs of the Tagalogs by Fray Juan de Plasencia. So, Fray Juan de Plasencia was born in the 16th century in Spain and died in 1590. So, he was among the first group of Franciscan missionaries who arrived at a port in Cavite, a few kilometers south of Manila, on the 2nd of July, 1578.
The Customs of the Tagalog was written because the author, Juan de Plasencia, was in the first place not a native Tagalog but a Franciscan missionary who first arrived in the Philippines in 1577. He was tasked by the King of Spain to document the customs and traditions of the colonized natives based on arguably his own observations and judgments. Customs of the Tagalog, just like any other colonial text, written during the Spanish colonial period, was intentionally made to provide an exoticized description of the Tagalog natives, clearly fed by politics and propaganda, and operated with the Western outsider's gaze.
So at this point, we will talk about the political system of the Tagalogs and how does this relate to their role in the barangays. So each Filipino population were called as barangays, and each barangay was governed by a chieftain or the so-called dato. So what is the role of the dato? The dato is the leader or the decision maker of the community, and he was also considered as the captain during wars. And the people in the community were also categorized based on their social standing. First is the dato, second is the maharlikas or the nobles, third is the aliping namamahay or commoners, and then fourth is the aliping sagigilid or the slaves. So the political system of the Tagalogs is that if you are a proven sinner or did not pay debt, the dato or the leader will consider you as the aliping sagigilid, considered as their punishment. However, Tagalogs, specifically the aliping namamahay or the commoners, can also own land for their agricultural land. So they pay taxes to the dato so that they can buy it from the dato. And in addition, maharlikas cannot easily wish to transfer from one barangay to another because of the expenses, especially when they have to pay it in gold tiles. For them to be approved by the dato to transfer, since the maharlikas are considered as the protector of the dato. So, if maharlikas will transfer from one barangay, the dato will no longer be protected.
So the difference between aliping namamahay and aliping sagigilid is that aliping namamahay is also called a commoner. They belong in the middle part of the case system, and even as commoners, an aliping namamahay have their own houses, which was usually built on the property of their masters. They were not at all slaves, as they were often only obligated to pay a percentage of their earnings or harvest to their masters and no more. They may sometimes be called upon by their masters for harvesting, sowing fields, building new structures, or for aid and emergency, though these were usually not part of their obligations. They could also freely buy their way out of debt and could marry without the consent of their masters. And aliping sagigilid refers to unmarried alipin without a house and whose existence was completely independent on the graces of their masters. They could only marry with the consent of their master, and once married, an alipin sagigilid becomes an aliping namamahay, as the master was not obligated to feed and house the family of the latter. Their obligations could also be transferred or sold to another master. Most of the people belonging to this class were the unmarried children of aliping namamahay or were unransomed captives taken from wars or raids.
What happens to the status of the children if a maharlika were to bear children among the slaves? If a maharlika were to bear children with a slave, the children are divided. The The first child, whether female or male, the third and the fifth child will belong to the father. The second child, the fourth, and the sixth child will belong to the mother. If the father is a slave, the children belonging to him will also become slaves. And if the father is a free man, then the children belonging to him will also become free men. And same goes to the mother and the children who belong to the mother. If the number of children is odd, the odd child will become half slave and half free.
As for their inheritance, the legitimate children of a father and mother can inherit equally, except in the case where the father and mother showed a slight partiality by such gifts as 2 or 3 taels, or perhaps a jewel. If a man had a child by one of his slaves, and he had also legitimate children, the former does not inherit anything from the father. Apart from the legitimate children, if a father had sons by a free unmarried woman, to whom a dowry was given, but she was not considered as a real wife, then all of these were classified as natural sons. Therefore, they qualify as natural heirs, but only a third of the entire inheritance. If there were no legitimate children, the father who may begotten a child by an unmarried woman can inherit in full. According to Plasencia, the Tagalogs have the name Simbahan, which means a temple or place of adoration, but it is because formerly when they wished to celebrate a festival, which they called Pandot or worship, they celebrated in the large house of its chief. Among their many idols, there was one called Bathala, whom they especially worshipped. The title seems to signify all-powerful or maker of all things. Moreover, they were very liable to find auguries in things they witnessed. They also practiced divination to see whether weapons such as dagger or knife were to be useful and lucky for their possessor whenever occasion should offer.
So how do they bury the dead? So their manner of burying the dead was as follows. So the deceased was buried beside his house, and if he were the chief, he was placed beneath a little house or porch which they constructed for this purpose. So before interring him, they mourned him for 4 days and afterward laid him on a boat which served as a coffin or bier, placing him beneath a porch where a guard was kept over him by a slave.
Placentia's account is primarily descriptive, where it only depicts the everyday lives of the Tagalogs. It contains various documentation that historians may use to reconstruct the political and socio-cultural past of the Tagalog region. The substance of his work is straightforward and realistic in terms of the idols whom they worship, the dato, their social classes, culture, and norms. Placentia's work is primarily his personal experience that he observed from the daily lives of the Tagalogs, which is why his work is considered as primary source. However, there have been shortcomings in Placentia's work. First, certain parts of the narrative are controversial to the point that they put the Tagalogs in such a way as to strengthen the legitimacy of the allegiance of the colonizers. Its preconception and descriptive biases thrive in the whole document. Second, Plasencia also concluded that Catholicism was able to expel the ancient and evil belief systems of the Tagalogs involving spirits, burials, and superstition. Finally, the foreshadows two significant figures: the observers, who is the Placencia himself, with his own background, subjectivities, and biases, and the observer's subjects, who are the Tagalogs, seen as the other. In colonial context, the interaction between these two figures, the colonizers and the colonized, runs in both yet unequal directions. The former is the superior one, whereas the latter is the inferior one. Seen from the core looking towards the culturally and politically inferior periphery, the colonizers find identity in their compelling position as a sophisticated superior self versus the inferior dominated other. The use of politically incorrect words such as Indians, tribes, and natives, and adjectives such as amusing, foolish, absurd in the text is a manifestation of the colonizer as being judgmental and racist. The customs of the Tagalogs were written by Juan de Plasencia in order to encourage the understanding of both the Spanish language among natives and the local languages among missionaries. Plasencia also wanted to facilitate the task of spreading Christianity. At an early point, Plasencia realized the need to learn the language of the natives in order to promote evangelization. And in a letter to the King of Spain dated June 18, 1585, He listed several of his works to that effect.
Its contribution to understanding Philippine history with the group is it proves that Filipinos were civilized and did not lack in culture before the arrival of Spain. As based on the source, Filipinos were already politically and economically organized and also has a functioning government, tax system, set of laws, traditions, practices, and beliefs. Some of the practices and beliefs are still evident today. These sources also provide vivid imagery of how life was, which allowed for further analysis of their practices, as well as comparisons with other accounts of succeeding time periods and other significant events in Philippine history. It also made us proud of our cultural legacy and gave us oneness and nationhood.
That would be all. Thank you.